Hi everyone, it's Henry here, and welcome to this next part in the Super Heavy Challenge, which is part of a wider playlist I'm going to be creating to do with painting vehicles. So this one we chose to do a Space Marine Fellblade, and last episode we focused pretty much purely on the initial stages of painting the armour, so getting our colours right and getting our shading right. In the next part of the video, I want to cover adding some life into those panels. Now, initially, I had a completely different plan for this, and I was looking back through some old videos of ours, just with some colours I'd used, and there was a technique that I'd used on a few of the models that I really love, but I wasn't sure I was going to use on this project. But having seen it again, I was like, I can't not. And then it ended up being basically enough content, I think, to be its own video. And I want to talk to you today about a technique that I picked up from reading a book called Tank Art by Michael Rinaldi, and it genuinely changed my hobby forever. Oil dot filtering. Let's paint. So as the name implies, we're going to use some oil paints for this technique. Now, I've recently picked up the new range of Abtalung 502 oils. If you've watched the channel for any length of time, you'll know I use these oils a lot. They're previous iterations. They've changed them slightly. They've changed some of the names. They've changed some of the colours ever so slightly. And I thought, rather than keep using out-of-date paints for the videos, I would pick up the new set to use. So you can see most of these are brand new tubes. Now, the idea behind oil dot filtering is that we can apply essentially as subtle as we like, from very, very subtle through to quite dramatic effects, where we tint and change the surface colour of our tank. And you can use any colours you want for oil dot filtering. You can be really, really brave with them if you want, or you can be a little more subdued like I'm being here, where I'm looking for colours that are roughly sort of dirty dirt, a dirt colour, something that's similar to the main colour of our tank, and then something a little bit lighter. And I've popped them on a piece of cardboard to leach out some of the excess oil so that the paints will dry a bit quicker. Now, when I'm filming, I actually usually do this on a piece of kitchen paper because it leaches the oil out really, really quickly. But when you're sort of painting for any length of time, I find a piece of cardboard's nicer. We don't need it to dry out super, super quickly. And then to thin our oils with, we're going to use white spirit, we call it over here, or mineral spirits. Now, low odour is important. Especially if you're going to work with it for any length of time, but so is ventilation and all the rest of it, but you deal with your own personal safety. I always crack a window open. If I'm working for any length of time, I use this absolute beauty, Sansador, which is an artist grade odourless mineral spirit. And those are the two things we're going to be using as actual products. And then to apply them, I'm going to have a mixture here of synthetic brushes and old natural hair brushes that aren't quite good enough for normal painting anymore, but still can hold a decent point. So I still got a little bit of accuracy with them. And you'll see there's a couple of different shapes there as well, but I'll talk about those when we actually come to using that brush later on in the process. So dot filtering, what's it all about? So I want in this series to show you guys and share with you things that I have learned. Some of them are things that I have learned from studying other people. So like I say, this one comes from reading a book called Tank Art by Michael Rinaldi. It is a technique that is widely used. This was just the first place that I came up against it. But I want to share all these things I've learned with you. Say many of them learned from other people. Some of them are things that I have come up with, but a lot of them are things that have been learned, from others. And this is my interpretation of those processes. And as I say, it's a process that I have used for many years now on my personal stuff, and I have featured it before in some videos. But I want to try and explain it, in a little bit more detail in this one. And much like I mentioned in the last video, this is all new ground for me, really creating these more in-depth videos. You'll have already seen from the thumbnail, it's a little bit different. I've also changed the lighting setup and stuff for this video, so do let me know in the comments if you've noticed any change, or if it looks good, if it's pleasing to watch, because that needs to be the goal. But yeah, so working with oil paints, there's absolutely nothing to be scared of. They are incredibly versatile, and if you want to do a bit of dot filtering and you're not quite sure sort of what ones to pick up, go and pick up a really dark brown, go and pick up like an orange colour, like a rust colour, and go and pick up, a white I think is really useful, or an off-white. Just a handful of them, okay? If you're going to paint a whole army and you really like this technique, go and grab one that's the colour of that army as well. So let's say we were painting a green tank here. I'd go and grab some sort of green as well to throw into the mix. And all we're trying to do, as I say, is affect the colour of the armour slightly. So we're not looking to completely change it, and we're looking to create variations on the armour here, variations of colour on the armour. Now, in my opinion, I use it to represent weathering that has occurred to the armour. So this is could be anything from atmospherics, it could be age related, could be sun faded, all those sorts of things that have affected the finish and the colour that's on the armour. I'm not necessarily using it here to dramatically change the tone or anything like that, which you can do. And in this case, the colours I have chosen, particularly that industrial earth colour, so that sort of what's a nice way to describe the brown. Secret Weapon Miniatures used to make a colour called baby poop wash. I think industrial earth is pretty close to that. Absalom 502 call it raw umber. I think it's a little more green than raw umber from other brands that I've used, but that quite unpleasant green brown colour. But the addition of that into the mix, I think, is really sort of pushing us more towards that classic idea of weathering. So grime effectively, that's the word I'm looking for. That's giving us a grimy look. You don't have to use dot filtering to make it look grimy. And perhaps on a future project we'll explore that further. But I am almost putting two techniques together here. So I'm doing the dot filtering to slightly change the finish on the armour and the look of the armour, and also begin to introduce some weathering to this tank. And I felt that was appropriate given that it's a Deathguard tank. I said in the last video I wanted to create this sort of white-grey armour, much like the novel covers, the artwork we have, not that beige look, but then we really want to dirt and grime it up. And I felt like this was a very good opportunity to do that. So originally I wasn't planning on doing this because I felt like it was a technique I wanted to do in a different video essentially, but why not? You know, it's something I love doing, and perhaps the title of the video might seem a little hyperbolic, but I would count this right up there with one of the best things I ever learned to do in the hobby. It genuinely changed how I work and how I like to paint my vehicles and troops to a degree. I've used this on infantry as well. I just wanted to say a quick thank you to those of you that support us over on Patreon. If you like the in-depth videos, Andy's been doing those for years over on Patreon, where he tends to take his display level projects and break them down into various components, and then you get long format videos on those. So if you support us over on Patreon, not only are you allowing Andy and I and Ben now to do this full time, but you're also getting a load of extra content. We massively appreciate all of that support. If you can't support us on Patreon for whatever reason, then hitting the thumbs up button, making a comment down below, sharing the video if you've enjoyed it, they make an enormous amount of difference to us as a channel. We're not particularly clickbaity, we're not chasing the latest whatevers, we're just boring kind of painting videos, so any sort of extra promotion is hugely valuable to us. So thank you to everyone who supports us on there. Now let's dig into the actual technique. There's going to be lots and lots of footage of me doing it, so all that waffle there doesn't really matter because I've still got plenty of time to talk to you about what I'm actually doing here. So initially I am using a brush with a decent point on it to apply lots of different dots of the oil paint to an area. And you'll have noticed that I like to work on fairly small areas, finish them, and then move around to the next. In hindsight, I should have started on the top of the tank. And I think we'll see that a little bit as we go on, just because of where some of the brush strokes end when we start to streak it. Now, with regards to placing the dots, we want to keep it nice and random. The proportion of one colour to the other is completely up to you. What I would say is that I have found lighter colours, and particularly white here, I mean, we're using a few dots of pure titanium white here, seem to be much, much stronger than any others. So I would encourage you to be a bit more sparing with them. Equally, if you do it and you don't think there's enough of one colour on there when you're finished, we'll just put a few dots of that colour on there and repeat the process. So we apply those various dots of colour nice and randomly all over the surface. Then I'm getting a wedge-shaped brush. Now, I can't remember what this one's. I think it might be called a filbert or something like that, but you can see the shape of it. It's quite soft, which I think is important as well. because we're not looking to sort of scratch, or we're not using it to create very, very defined streaks like we might use a different brush for, which we'll talk about in next week's video when we come to doing more of the weathering, or the next part rather I should say, of this video. So a soft wedge-shaped brush. I'm then touching that into the clean mineral spirits, and I'm then putting the brush on that piece of kitchen paper and taking off most of the mineral spirits that are on there. It's not a dry brush, it's not a slightly damp brush, but it's not sopping wet with the mineral spirits. I don't want to touch it to the surface and then all of those mineral spirits just wash off. But equally, it needs to be wet enough so that when we pull it down, it starts to move the oil paint. Now you'll remember when we finished last video, we'd given the tank a quick coat of matte varnish, so it's actually got a sort of satin finish to it. It's not super glossy, but equally it's not super matte, so the paint moves around fairly nicely on the surface without us having to dig in too much. The varnish is nothing to do with protecting the paintwork that's underneath. As long as your acrylic paint is dry, you're not going to have any reactions with oils or with white spirits. But if you are too rough with your brushwork over the top of it, if you're pushing too hard to get things moving around, you might damage the paintwork, and that's simply abrasion. So that's why I say we want to make sure we've got enough mineral spirits on the brush so we're not having to push too hard on the surface. And hopefully, as you're noticing as we're going down this panel, I'm never trying to achieve any one stage in one go. I'm probably moving up and down each time. Oh, gosh, it must be, 50 brush strokes or so? Something like that in total on an area once I'm done. Maybe fewer in some instances. And you can see here it's important as well with your mineral spirits to keep changing them out, keep them clean, because as you keep putting that brush back in, you're going to dirty it up. And what we don't want to be doing is just painting a sort of murky colour just all over the surface, right? We're just wanting to streak the colours that we've got over there. I also will do this dot filtering over the green because the colours work absolutely fine with it. If this was a display level piece, I might introduce a little bit of green dots just over the stripe as well. I think it might make it a bit more interesting, but this isn't. This is just a video to show you techniques and have a bit of fun on a tank. But also make sure I go over the decals as well, because I want those to look like they are painted on to the tank in real life, as it were. They shouldn't be all pristine. They shouldn't be any different, in my opinion, to the paintwork around them. And the only other thing really to do with the brushstroke is I'm always trying to keep it in one direction, ideally top to bottom, or if it's a top panel like this, front to back. We want that streaking to occur in the same direction. And this is one of those techniques that I can't really remember the first time that I did it, but I never remember a time where I found it particularly challenging, which makes me think it's probably not a difficult technique. What are any pitfalls that I can see occurring with it? Well, if you put too big a blob of oil when you're doing the dot, it's too dominating to the others around it. You'll wipe your brush across it and it'll just be this really solid streak, and it'll take ages to sort of buff it out. So that's a potential pitfall. Having too much of the mineral spirits on the brush can be problematic. What you can end up doing is almost creating an oil wash on the surface of the model, and then that will accumulate in some of the recesses. Now, that may not be a problem, particularly if you're using the darker colours, but say you've got too much of the white or the buff that we've used, then you will get a slightly strange effect in the recess, especially because we're going to panel line later. So to reiterate, we're just going to apply lots of different dots, all in a random pattern. Wet the brush, touch off the excess of mineral spirits, keep the brush moving in the same direction, ideally top to bottom, create those streaks. Working on panel by panel or small area by small area. The reason I do that is because I like the work time it has with the oils. I don't have to push too hard to move them. And get comfortable. It took a few hours to do the whole tank. When we've got a surface such as the top of the turret here, where it's a dome, all I've done is I'm keeping my brush moving top to bottom, and then I'm just moving the dome around so that it's not all going in the one one direction, not quite the right word, but you know what I mean. So it's following the curve of the dome here, rather than them all going that same way. I really love how it looks. And I must reiterate as well, you can be as extreme and over the top with this as you want to be, or as subtle as you want to be. It's completely in your control. Now, the other oil effect that I will use very often, and this is something I learned in the first thing I painted when I got back in the hobby, was using enamels and oils, was to do something called pin washing. And this is to help bring some definition into the model. Now, I am giving the model a quick spritz of gloss varnish here, and partly that is to prevent the oil work that I've already done from reactivating when I use the thinners over the top of it. But it's also because when we pin wash, the idea is, you might hear it called panel lining as well. It's where we want to run a colour just into the recesses to provide definition between two areas. And the less surface tension there is on the model, the more likely the paint you apply will stick to just those recesses and not flood out over a flat surface. This is more of a problem particularly on plastic models as well, when some of the cuts aren't necessarily as deep, say around rivets and things like that. So by having a slightly glossy surface, and then by using an oil wash, so that will have mineral spirits as a base, which have a lower surface tension than, say, water. And then we have the gloss varnish providing a lower surface tension on the surface that we're actually painting onto. You get this thing called capillary action, where the wash is sucked right into those recesses and it more or less stays there. You'll get a tiny little bit of bleeding very often, but it's nothing we can't fix very, very simply. Now, you can do this with acrylic paints, and you can apply the theory that we've done here with acrylic paints. I've done videos on that in the past as well. If I remember, I'll link up to them. But I would really, I imagine you're not watching this video if you're not willing to give oils a go. Perhaps I should have called it something to do with oils, but anyway, so it's all learning for me. It's been very strange going from basically painting up one miniature a week, finishing it, chucking it up, having a bit of fun, to trying to create these multi-part series. So thank you, those of you that are bearing with me on it. I'm very excited to what it means for the channel going forwards and what we can do. This is a happy hobby place for me, and I hope what that will do is come across in the videos, and we're able to do some fun projects together. And on that note, wow, the reaction to joining in on this has been incredible. The Discord has gone off. It's outrageous. There are some wonderful projects being done in there. Lots of super heavies in there, and then just a few normal tanks for people that want to try the techniques but haven't got a super heavy. Jump in there, join in. There's some wonderful stuff. And anyone who gets it finished by sort of mid-end of December, we'll shut that up, and we'll do a video on that, and we'll look at everyone's work and give out a few freebies and things like that as well. To that note, I reckon we'll finish this the week before Christmas, something like that, and then maybe we can chuck the video out over Christmas where we have a look at all the results. So yeah, as you can see here, I'm just creating an oil wash. So by mixing that oil with more mineral spirits to create the wash, and then just going into the recesses and just touching the brush nice and light, and that paint just wicks straight off. And I think it's worth noting that we've used very few paints and very few colours up until this point with the armour and with this oil work. And I think we've been able to create some really interesting looking armour here. What we want to do is take this away, or what I'm trying to do here is take this away from looking like a plastic model or a plastic toy. I want it to look like a scaled down version of what it is, but I want it to have a little bit of Warhammer about it, by which I mean that slightly fantastical. It doesn't have to make perfect sense. I'd like it to look cool on the table. You know, it doesn't need to be in a photograph and trick you into thinking it's something that's real. But it's got a lot of those sort of real world or military modelling techniques in there. And as I said in the last video, this really for me was pioneered by Phil Stachynskis and Mark Bedford over at Forge World. And they created this style on Warhammer models in the Imperial Armour books. And then you've had plenty of the Forge World studio painters have come since and replicated that look. And I love looking at it in the Imperial Armour books, in the Heresy books, all of that. I think it just looks awesome. But I do think it's important to just talk about the influence those two painters, Phil Stachynskis and Mark Bedford, have had, you know, on I think the look of of painting tanks, particularly Warhammer tanks. And I just love it. I just think it's awesome. And I just want to share it. So that's what this video is really about. And let's say the actual dot filtering technique, picking that up from Rinaldi. So as I mentioned in the previous video, do go and check out some of those people. I recommended them. So once the oil wash has dried, and I think I left this, I don't know, an hour or so, maybe 2, went and walked the dog, had some lunch, came back. And now I'm using a brush much, much drier than it was when we were doing the dot filtering. So it's got just enough mineral spirits on there that it can move the oil when we touch it, but it's not washing it or anything like that. And I'm just going up around all the areas I've applied the pin wash to and just cleaning them up. So whether that's sort of just feathering out, blending the oil in, it might be removing it entirely in some instances where we've got the odd dot that we don't want it to be. And much like all the rest of the process in this video, it's about, I think, relaxing, taking your time, getting into a sort of flow with it. There's no rush with any of this. You've got loads and loads of work time. If you get it wrong, just go do it again. Doesn't matter. Like this, there's no point of no return with any of this. But just look at some of those colours and stuff that dot filtering's put in. And I have gone a little more extreme than perhaps I typically would with it to try and create that early stages of weathering. But for me, the difference now, and it's worth mentioning, I said in the last video, I felt that the modulation I'd done was a little on the over the top side for my taste. But actually, once we start doing techniques like this, it dulls down everything that's underneath it. So going a bit too far with those stages before could be beneficial. Now here I'm going back to giving the model that matte varnish, which I say is more of a satin, but a matte varnish finish. 2 reasons. One, that the look of the model's horrible at the minute because it's really glossy in some areas and then quite matte in other areas with the oil. So we want to make the finish nice and consistent. And also we want to paint after this. Now, once oil paint is dry, you can paint over the top of it with acrylics, absolutely no problem. I say dry, you leave it a day, you're normally absolutely fine. Sometimes less if there's not much on there and you use the hairdryer. It's like many things. There's a scale, right, of usability with it. But the reason I want that matte varnish on there at this point is because we've got lots of painting to do over the top of it, and the paint will just adhere much, much better to this more matte surface than it would if I left it that very, very glossy and then in some cases very, very matte, like we had it before. But there's the armour now after we've done this process. And on a tank this big, as I say, this took a couple of, really 2 days really with filming and doing other bits. But you can see the difference. It's, I think, quite dramatic. And some people may not like it. And one of the best parts about this stage is it's all optional, isn't it? But it's completely optional. Just leave this bit off. If you don't really like that stained look, well, don't do that bit. I would suggest you still do the pin washing because that will give you that little bit of extra definition around the panels. But the actual dot filtering, just don't do it if you don't like it. But for me, this was a real leap forward in my hobby when I first discovered this technique, and I was suddenly able to start making my models look more like I pictured them in my head. And it's a very exciting, I'm sure you've had those, and I'd love to know what techniques or colours or anything like that you've had that experience with, and pop it down in the comments, share it. Maybe we'll explore that in future videos as well. But it was, it was a proper mind-blowing technique for me. A technique that, as I watch this video back now and I'm talking to you, seems relatively simple. And I think it is relatively simple, and I hope it isn't intimidating because it really doesn't need to be. Go out and grab a few oils, open the window, pop a mask on if you want to as well, pop a respirator on as well if that's the sort of thing that concerns you about it. And give it a go. You could have a go with some oils for all in much less than 20 quid. Would get you a few oils and some mineral spirits to try it with. And if you don't like it, well, nothing really lost with that. But it could potentially unlock a whole new way for you to create that picture you've got in your mind of what you want your stuff to look like. And for me, it's really what all of this creative hobby is about. So if you've got any questions about anything I've done in this video, pop them down in the comments and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Next up, we're going to be looking at chip-in and battle damage and all that fun stuff as well, and getting more and more life into this mini. Pop all your updates in the Discord if you're there. If you don't use Discord, please feel free to tag us in social media or send me some email pics and stuff. I love to see people following along with this. It gives me a real thrill, and I'm very, very grateful to those of you that are doing it. So take care. I'll see you next time. If you like any of the models that you've seen in this video, but you don't have the time or the wherewithal to do them yourselves, then consider giving Ben an email at commissions@cultofpaint.com. Maybe he can help you out.